The number of criminal masterminds is increasing day by day. But what shocks us the most is that a few of them are in the police department. They are wrongfully convicting people and putting them into jail by planting evidence on them. Who are these police officers? How did they get sued? On number 3, we have Jamal True Love. I Love New York 2 was a reality show aired on Hoon, and Jamal True Love made an appearance on it. He was an actor as well as a well-skilled hip-hop artist. In October 2007, Jamal was convicted for the murder of Sue Kuke. The San Francisco Police Department concluded that Jamal was the one who murdered Kuke. Sue Kuke was their neighbor of Jamal. They had good relations with each other. Jamal would call Sue Kuke his friend due to his friendly nature. Jamal never thought that the San Francisco Police Department would charge murder without any reason. He believes that he is innocent and never did anything wrong. He was not allowed to talk to anyone. He couldn't connect with his lawyers. He requested to speak to the police officer or DA, but he was denied access to everyone. No one made themselves available to him. He felt as if he stepped into the biggest trap laid down by the police officers. The sentence he received shocked him to the core. He has to spend 50 years in jail. How can the police officers falsely convict him? Did everyone believe that Jamal commits such a grave crime? There was no evidence from the side of police officers to submit, no forensic evidence to show that he committed the crime, and no signs of physical injury on his body as proof of struggle. Priscilla Lua Lamega was the witness submitted by the San Francisco Police Department. Who is she? How is he related to Jamal and Kuke? Well, she said that she saw a shooting from her second-floor window on 23 July 2007. She said that she could identify who was the culprit, but when asked to identify the culprit among a bunch of photos, she failed miserably. This showed that she was lying the whole time. The police officers fabricated the story and falsely convicted Jamal. He had nothing to do with the murder of Kuke. Priscilla decided to speak against Jamal because she was given $60,000 to do so. She thought that she could start a new life with money given by the prosecution. She had no principles, and this led her to go against Jamal. The detectives had another suspect who could be the real murderer, but they didn't go after him. Instead, they jailed Jamal, who was innocent. He spent 6 years in jail when all the truth came out. He had a terrible life in jail, and he had no one to blame but the San Francisco Department. He never thought that such a conspiracy would be planned by the police officers, who he trusted and who he believed would protect him. He thought that the police officers must have mistook him for the murderer. But never in his wildest imagination, he thought that they planned this against him. Alex Reisman was his lawyer, and he expressed his disappointment in the integrity of the San Francisco Police Department. He also said that Jamal had to miserably spend years in jail thinking about what he did wrong to serve this. He was away from his family for a long time, and he missed out on his previous time with them. His career was destroyed, and he lost all his work network. His appeal was accepted, and the court overturned the previous decision. He was finally free in 2015. Jamal became an inspiration to all as he proved his innocence. He escaped from the trap of the San Francisco Police Department. He decided to go after those who jailed him. He filed a petition against the city of San Francisco, and the court found the detectives guilty of planning a trap against Jamal. The detectives fabricated evidence against Jamal, and they didn't disclose any exculpatory evidence. They were charged with both these offenses, and they were found guilty. This brought a lot of shame to the San Francisco Police Department. In 2019, Jamal received more than $13 million for being falsely jailed and for the misconduct and offenses committed by the detectives against him. He decided to end things here, as he has his whole life before him to live. He pursued his passion and made it albums. He also acted in the movie titled The Last Black Man of San Francisco. He wrote about his awful experience in jail, and he said that no amount of money could make him feel good about the precious years he lost. He missed his family, and he was not present for any of the family functions. He lost touch with his kids, and he wished to see them once again. He thought that he would be spending his whole life in the miserable jail, but he held on to his last hope. He fought for his life, and justice was served to him, even though it was delayed for 6 years. His family became happy that they had him back. His lawyer fought for Jamal day and night. They never thought that Jamal would see daylight, but they knew the truth was on his side. Do you find the story of Jamal Truelove inspirational? Have you ever heard about him before? On number 2, we have Richard Rosario. Richard Rosario was convicted of killing George Colasso. The murders took place in 1996, and he received 25 years of jail time. Well, the most shocking fact about the story of Richard Rosario is that he never committed this murder. He was innocent. He was falsely convicted and sentenced to jail. He had the perfect alibi as he was in Florida when the crime occurred. How can he be present at the murder scene when in reality he was 1,000 miles away? Rosario came to New York City when he was informed that the police officers were searching for him. He was pointed out by the eyewitnesses from a photo album shown to them by police officers. 2 eyewitnesses were sure, whereas the third one was not. Rosario thought that this was a false allegation and a mistake. That's why he caught the immediate bus to New York and boarded it. He never expected to be arrested and sentenced to jail for 25 years. In 2016, the lawyers of Rosario decided to give this case one more chance by failing an appeal. At the same time, 13 Alibis, a documentary series, was aired by NBBQ. More and more people came to know about the tragic story of Rosario, and they were all thrilled to know what will happen to the appeal. People started raising questions about why the 13 alibis were never investigated and what happened to the funds for the investigation. The story received significant media attention. The new district attorney was Mrs. Clark, who decided to reopen the case. She started calling the alibi witnesses and interviewing them to know the truth. Rosario finally was acquitted of all charges after 20 years. Rosario filed a case against the New York Police Department, and the court ruled in favor of him. The court decided that the constitutional right of Rosario was violated. He received $5 million for being the victim of the misconduct of one of the detectives and for the violation of his constitutional right. On number 1, we have Rodney King. In 1991, Rodney King was beaten by a group of police officers and caused severe injury to him. He was out on patrol for being part of a robbery. He was brutally beaten and kicked by these police officers for no reason, and their faces were caught on tape. The jury let go of the officers and declared that they were not guilty. This led to a massive protest and outbreak of a fight among the people. King spoke to the people, requesting them to get along. King and his lawyers approached the court again, and this time 2 officers were convicted for attacking King. They were jailed for 30 months. After several negotiations, King received $3.8 million for the medical expense and for being attacked by the police officer. Theodore didn't receive any payment from the force, and Timothy got dismissed. They were the other 2 police officers who attacked King. Daniel Garza was helpless after being thrown and pinned to the ground. Officer Mario Cardona, who Garza had known for years, was on the verge of breaking his wrist. Garza recalled, "I was trying to be a man and trying to hold in the pain, but man, that wrist lock hurts. He's just bending it and bending it." But what compelled Cardona to go so far? It turns out that his actions were motivated by rage toward Garza, whom he accuses of attempting to kidnap his stepdaughter. Are cops bestowed such authority? Seems that the 2 men had quite the history, with Garza having previously dated Cardona's stepdaughter, Naomi Villanueva. The relationship had hit rock bottom, with Villanueva moving out of her parents' house to live with a friend. In May 2015, Garza allegedly took Villanueva without her consent from her friend's house and brought her to her parents' house in Whittier, where Cardona lived across the street. Cardona saw Garza doing pilots in his yard and ordered him to come down to the street. As soon as Garza came down, Cardona began his assault. According to Garza, he was not the aggressor, and a neighbor who witnessed the incident testified in Garza's favor. The sheriff deputies who arrived at the scene noticed redness on Garza's face, bruises and abrasions to his knees, and redness on his wrists. Garza filed a complaint against Cardona, which led to a federal lawsuit against Cardona, Chief Beck, and the city of Los Angeles. Garza alleged false arrest, unreasonable search and seizure, excessive force, assault and battery, negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. A video of the incident filmed by one of Garza's neighbors was also presented at the trial. They had made up a story of what had happened to make him look like a hero and me look like a criminal, says Daniel Garza. The U.S. District Judge Stephen V. Wilson presided over the hearing where the former deputy city attorney, Michael Amarian, spoke in defense of the city. The jury found Cardona to be acting with malice as an off-duty officer, and on June 26, 2017, they ordered him to pay Garza $210,000 in damages. On top of that, the court added another $664,000 in attorney's fees and $26,000 for post-trial costs. The City of Law refused to take responsibility for Cardona's actions and even refused to indemnify the officer, forcing him to pay for the charges out of his pocket. Jim DeSimone, Garza's attorney, claims, "This is the problem with the left. This is why people are out on the street." The case is a clear example of police officers using excessive force against individuals and getting away with it. In this case, however, Garza was able to stand up to the authorities who violated his rights, and he was able to win his lawsuit against Cardona. The jury's decision to find Cardona guilty of acting with malice sends a strong message that law enforcement officers cannot get away with using excessive force against citizens. It is worth noting that this case also highlights the importance of civilians being aware of their rights and standing up to law enforcement officers when they feel their rights have been violated. Garza's decision to file a complaint and a lawsuit against Cardona shows that individuals can take action against police brutality and excessive force. As more and more people become aware of their rights and are willing to take action, law enforcement officers will be held accountable for their actions, and if you sue a cop in LAA for excessive force, you are in for a wild ride. However, Garza's decision to stand up to Cardona and the authorities who violated his rights resulted in a victory for him, sending a strong message that law enforcement officers cannot get away with using excessive force against citizens. The case of Harold Hill is just a perfect example of how our justice system can go wrong. From a gruesome rape and murder to a wrongful conviction, this case definitely ticks all the boxes. So, what underwent? First off, we have the detectives who were assigned to the case, Kenneth Bordeaux and John Halloran, the so-called beacons of justice. They were the ones who got the confession out of Peter Williams, who was later found to be in jail at the time of the crime. So, how did they churn out a false confession of someone who wasn't even there? Hill's confession is also questionable, as he claims that he was physically and mentally abused until he confessed to crimes he didn't commit. Is this the kind of behavior we expect from our law enforcement officers? Moving on to the trial itself. Hill was only 16 years old when the crime was committed, but was tried as an adult at the age of 31. This is an interesting move from the prosecution, considering that neither of the defendants had a criminal record prior to the incident. The jury found Hill and Young guilty of murder, and they were sentenced to life without parole. But 13 long years later, DNA tests revealed that the hair found at the crime scene and the cellular materials under Kathy Morgan's fingernails didn't match either of the defendants. Think of the agony Hill went through for something he didn't do. What made Hill hold on to his life is still astonishing. Despite this evidence, the prosecutors disputed the findings, suggesting that the hairs were unrelated to the crime and that the cellular material could have come from sweat or drool left over by the recovery team. It's shocking that the prosecutors were so stubborn, even in the face of such clear evidence. Harold and Young were eventually released from prison, but tragedy struck when Young was killed in a hit and run incident. Hill, however, filed a complaint against the city of Chicago, the police, and the two detectives involved in the case, accusing them of forcing a confession and violating his civil rights. The case was settled for $1.25 million, with Hill receiving $500,000, and the rest going to attorney's fees. It's surprising that the detectives were only asked to pay a measly $7,500 each for their part in this whole debacle. Do you think that is bad? Wait till you hear this. It's also worth noting that Hill was later convicted again for an unrelated armed robbery charge and is currently serving 27 years in prison. But despite this, it's clear that the justice system failed Harold Hill in the past. This case highlights the importance of reforming our justice system to ensure that wrongful convictions don't occur, and that those who abuse their power are held accountable. The case of Harold Hill is a tragedy of errors, starting from the investigation to the trial and subsequent conviction. Being wrongfully imprisoned for 13 years, Hill was not awarded a chance to conform to life outside because he was turned into a criminal by the system. The system absolutely messed the hell out of him, and the cops only paid $7,500 each. When cops do what they did, they need to be locked away for at least as long as the victims they put in jail. Instances have aroused where police officers have misused their authority, employed excessive force, and violated people's rights, particularly those from marginalized communities, leading to distrust and fear of law enforcement. Are they subjected to such power? What are the legal repercussions for them? However, and most of all, would they be treated differently when compared to the masses? Join us as we take a closer look at two of the most uncanny cases that could make question the judicial system as a whole. Our first case kicks off with the case of Harold Hill, which is just a perfect example of how our justice system can go wrong. This case definitely checks all the boxes, including a horrific rape and murder, as well as a mishandled conviction, you name it. So then what went about? Let's start with the so-called beacons of justice, Kenneth Bordeaux and John Halloran, the detectives who were assigned to the case and the beacons of law. They were the ones who managed to extract a confession from Peter Williams, who was later discovered to have been in custody when the crime was committed. How did they even produce a fabricated confession from someone who wasn't even present? Hill claims he was physically and mentally tortured until he confessed to crimes he didn't commit. Is this the kind of conduct we anticipate from our law enforcement personnel? The trial itself was held when Hill was 31 years old, despite the fact that he was only 16 at the time of the crime and was therefore tried as an adult. At this point, it's just not fair, and it's incomprehensible what Hill is going through. Given that neither of the defendants had a criminal history prior to the incident, this is an intriguing move by the prosecution. Hill and Young were given a life without parole sentence after the jury found them guilty of the murder. However, 13 long years later, DNA tests showed that neither of the defendants' cellular components found under Kathy Morgan's fingernails, nor the hair found at the crime scene matched either of them. Imagine the sheer suffering Hill endured for something he didn't do. It continues to amaze me how Hill managed to hang on to his life. The prosecutors disputed the findings despite this evidence, claiming that the hairs had nothing to do with the crime and that the cellular material might have come from sweat or drool that the recovery teams had left behind. Even in the face of such overwhelming evidence, it's shocking that the prosecutors were so resistant. Young was killed in a hit-and-run incident shortly after Harold and Young were finally let out of jail. This almost leads us to believe that this is almost a plot to clip both of them. Hill, on the other hand, accused the city of Chicago, the police, and the two detectives involved in the case of coercing a confession and violating his civil rights in a complaint he filed against them. The case was resolved for $1.25 million, of which Hill received $500,000 and the remainder was paid to the lawyers. It's surprising that the detectives were only asked to make a pitiful $7,500 payment for their roles in this whole fiasco. You think that's all? Wait until you hear this. It should be noted that Hill is currently serving a 27-year sentence after being found guilty once more of an unrelated charge of armed robbery. In spite of this, it is obvious that Harold Hill was let down by the legal system in the past. This case emphasizes the need for justice system reform to prevent erroneous convictions and make sure that those who abuse their power are held accountable. Starting with the investigation and continuing through the trial and conviction, the Harold Hill case is a tragedy of errors. Hill was wrongfully detained for 13 years, and because the system made him a criminal, he was never given the opportunity to adapt to life outside of prison. He was completely screwed over by the system, and the police only received $7,500 each. When police officers commit acts like the ones they did, they should be imprisoned for a minimum of the same amount of time as the victims they imprison. Up next, we have an oddball in the form of Sergeant Mario Cardona versus Daniel Garza. After being thrown and pinned to the ground, Daniel Garza was rendered helpless. Officer Mario Cardona, a longtime friend of Garza's, was on the verge of breaking his wrist. Confronting a criminal and keeping him confined is one thing, but putting a civilian without a reason is shocking. Garza recalled, "I was trying to be a man and trying to hold in the pain, but man, that wrist lock hurts. He's just bending it and bending it." But why did Cardona go so far as to nearly break his wrist? His actions were apparently driven by rage toward Garza, whom he accuses of attempting to kidnap his stepdaughter. But are cops subjected to such an authority in the first place? It appears that the two men had a long history together because Garza had once dated Naomi Villanueva, the stepdaughter of Cardona. Villanueva left her parents' home to live with a friend because the relationship had reached its breaking point. However, Villanueva was allegedly taken from her friend's home in May 2015 by Garza without her consent and brought to her parents' residence in Whittier, where Cardona lived across the street. Garza was performing pilates in his garden when Cardona saw him and told him to go to the street. Cardona started his assault as soon as Garza sat down. Garza claimed that he was not the aggressor, and a neighbor who saw the incident attested to Garza's innocence. As soon as they arrived on the scene, the sheriff's deputies saw redness on Garza's face, bruises and abrasions on his knees, and redness on his wrist. After Garza complained about Cardona, the city of Los Angeles, Chief Beck, and Cardona were named as defendants in a federal lawsuit. Garza claimed that he had been the victim of a false arrest, an arbitrary search and seizure, overuse of force, an assault and battery, negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The trial also featured a video of the incident captured by one of Garza's neighbors. They had made up a story of what had happened to make him look like a hero, and me look like a criminal, Daniel Garza. The hearing was presided over by U.S. District Judge Stephen V. Wilson, who heard former Deputy City Attorney Michael Amarian speak in defense of the city. Cardona was found to have acted maliciously as an off-duty officer by the jury, and on June 26, 2017, he was ordered to pay Garza $210,000 in damages. In addition, the court added $664,000 in attorney's fees and $26,000 in post-trial costs. The city of L.A. refused to take responsibility for Cardona's actions and even refused to indemnify the officer, forcing him to pay for the charges out of his pocket. Jim DeSimone, Garza's attorney, claims, "This is the problem with the LAPD. This is why people are out on the street." The incident serves as an example of how police can abuse people and get away with it. In this instance, however, Garza was able to confront the authorities who had infringed upon his rights and prevail in his lawsuit against Cardona. It is clear that police officers cannot get away with using excessive force against citizens after the jury found Cardona guilty of malice. It is important to note that this case also emphasizes how crucial it is for citizens to be aware of their rights and to speak out against law enforcement when they believe those rights have been violated. Garza's decision to accuse Cardona of using excessive force and file a complaint against him demonstrates that people can take legal action to stop police brutality. What do you think of these cases? Which do you think is most unfair? Sound off in the comments below and make sure to let us know if we missed out on anything. While you are at it, make sure to hit that subscribe and leave a like to never miss an update from us. Thanks for watching.